South Africa exports about half of its agricultural products, with the sector contributing an average of 2.8% to South Africa's gross domestic product. According to the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, in 2024, the African continent maintained the lion's share of South Africa's agricultural exports, accounting for 42% of the total values. Asia and the Middle East collectively accounting for 21%, and the European Union became South Africa's third largest agricultural market with a share of 19%. To talk about the significance of expanding South Africa's market access, we are joined by Thabile Nkunjana, who is the Senior Agricultural Economist for Trade Research at the National Agricultural Marketing Council. Thabile, it's good to have you. Thanks very, very much for joining us here on the program.
Good morning to you, Ellen, and the viewers. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right, so according to the Department of Agriculture, at the end of the second quarter of 2024, the agricultural sector contributed around about 896,000 new jobs. What does this mean for our agricultural exports, this particular sector?
Yeah, no, it's quite remarkable, Leanne, that the agricultural sector does continue to maintain these jobs. Because even if you had to go back to the National Development Plan that was tabled in 2012, one of the key components was that the agricultural sector has to maintain or create more jobs. And if you had to compare it to the around the 600,000 jobs that it had back then, it has increased quite significantly, because now we are talking around close to 900,000 jobs that the sector has. So the reality is that this sector is quite doing well, irrespective of the challenges that it has faced over time, be it trade disputes or some misunderstanding in terms of trade between its trade partners. But the reality is that it does maintain the jobs, and it continues to grow, given that we are also seeing a bit of increase across the production, and the more production and more markets means more jobs for the sector.
Yeah, indeed. So the good thing, and what I'm gathering from your answer, is that our products are they're very compatible with global markets, and I imagine that it works very, very well for where South Africa is and what we can produce for the world.
Very correct, Alian. Very correct. Because, for instance, if we are to look into the whole South Africa as an exporter in the world, it is the only country from Africa that is within the top 40 of the exporting countries in the world. That on its own is remarkable. And then when you have to compare it to the countries that export, some of the top products that we export, be it wine, be it fruit, such as apples, mandarins, or oranges, we remain quite competitive in that. And as a result, I think we have seen some growth in all that. This includes the likes of avocados, some of the top exportable products that South Africa exports to the world. We have quite huge countries such as your Mexicos, your Perus, your Chiles, and the Australians that are doing very well in terms of agricultural production. And with South Africa, given some of these challenges, and of course, when you have to look into it in terms of it being assisted by the state, some of the countries that I just mentioned, they tend to get a lot of support from their state as far as the subsidies and all other things. So for South Africa being one of the least supported agricultural sectors by the state, remaining competitive in such a competition, it tells you how resilient and of course how well the sector is doing, which is why it's important that you always have to have quite some good economic performances within the country, and of course having policies that does allow that. And this, of course, it includes trading relations across the world where South Africa is to export its agricultural products to.
Yeah, so I think it's important now that we move our attention to some of the risks that this agricultural sector is facing now. I mean, just like numerous other countries, South Africa really does find itself in the midst of some very massive changing geopolitics. AGOA, we know the benefits that South Africa and particularly the agricultural sector has when it comes to AGOA and how it works with South Africa. I mean, approximately 33% of production in certain South African citrus regions, for just one example, are at risk if, in fact, AGOA does not go ahead in its current form come September. Let's talk about the risks of this to our economy.
It's quite huge, Leon, because, I mean, as much as we have, for some years, I think if we may just take this a little bit back, South Africa and the United States, as far as trading is concerned, there has been some issues, and this dates back during President Obama's tenure. You'll recall at one point there was a situation where South Africa was given 60 days, to respond to some of the issues that were related to some of the products, particularly meat products that US was sending into South Africa, and there was an issue, there was a concern with South Africa with that. But because of those, the demands that were made by President Obama then, South Africa has to give in, and as a result, we continued to be beneficiaries of AGOA. And this moves on to all the other coming presidents. 2018, same thing to President Trump. Again, with President Biden in 2024, remember, around the issues around the Ukraine-Russia relations, and particularly another issue with Israel. So this time around, though, it appears as if it is going to be even more trickier, given that President Trump looks like he's acting on his promises. And this is something that he has actually done for the past 3 weeks. He has been in the office. You will recall, for instance, what has happened with Mexico, what has happened to Colombia, Canada, and those are some of the, for instance, 3 of top trading partners with the US. They are currently facing, tariffs, and something that South Africa should not take lightly, given that President Trump has actually signed an order that says, he has to address some of the issues relations to human rights violations in South Africa. So for now, as much as we have faced this before, it looks like this time around we perhaps going to have to be even more careful than before, because even the administration around President Trump, it is really behind him. And to make an example, is the foreign minister who just recently announced that he's not coming to South Africa to attend the G20, mainly on the issues related to what President Trump is not happy about in relation to South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, Thabile, you're so correct that this really, the way that President Trump has been speaking about South Africa since he's taken office, it certainly does let us assume that this is going to be the end of AGOA. I mean, we're just assuming right now and speculating from the stance that he's been taking with regard to South Africa and many issues. But let's now just say that does happen. How do we mitigate the losses that we could experience? I mean, because obviously we've got job losses at stake. We have got some agricultural farms and sectors, whether it be citrus, wine, whatever the case may be, that rely wholly on the market in America and AGOA. What do we do? How do we expand this base so that we say, okay, if in fact it does happen, we're okay because we have something to fall back on? It's going to take a while, Leon, to adjust to a situation like that. Should it happen, it will take a minute for South Africa to adjust. But at least the positive thing that has been happening in recent times is that South Africa is really trying to diversify its agricultural products. And of course, I think recently we have seen Minister John announcing some of the markets since the Thailand. And even Minister Chagotiza, before she left the office last year, there's a couple of trade agreements that we signed. And as a result of that, the numbers that you just mentioned earlier in terms of the actual products increasing last year, it can be attested, at least attributed to that. So the main issue that we need to do now is that there's going to be some of the key products that, for instance, that are too concentrated to be just diversified immediately should we lose this. For instance, you will take citrus, one of the largest, agricultural products that South Africa exports, and absolutely a key, employer across the country, especially to the regions where citrus is produced.
it's not going to be easy. For instance, around 8% of it, which was valued around 1 billion in 2023, went to the United States. The same can be said about mandarins, with wine, cocoa, at least over $500 million of their exports going to the United States. So to just diversify that, it's not going to be easy, which is the same thing that there's a lot of comments when we saw some of the vegetables and other products in South Africa being, banned from some countries. And that is quite a situation that we would face, particularly for the farmers that are directly, produce for this specific market, because a producer or an exporter developed his or her products based on the availability of a market. And once you do that, there's a lot that goes behind to ensure that you continue to supply that market. And then if you are to change for any reason, it takes time, and it's not going to be easy for South Africa to do that. But at least the good thing is that we are continuing exploring more markets, and it's good that we've opened 2025, one of the good news to get a new market.
I mean, we even heard the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, recently announcing the commencement of market access for exportation of fresh apples to the Kingdom of Thailand. So there are other opportunities as well. And I think one of the big opportunities, from what I'm gathering, is from the figures that we've seen. I mean, last year, the African continent, as you mentioned, maintained the lion's share of South Africa's agricultural exports, about 42% of the total values. I mean, there's Asia, there's the Middle East, collectively accounting for 21%. And then, of course, the European Union with 19%, and then America at 6%. So we can put this in perspective, and we can feel that, perhaps there is something that we definitely are going to fall back on. I mean, there's also the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which I imagine is something that we need to really benefit with, as well as deepening our agricultural relations with the BRICS nations.
Absolutely. I mean, especially you talk about Africa. Africa is always, at least in recent times, despite one of the leading markets. And the good thing is that also from the data from last year, we are seeing that it's increasing, its share in terms of what South Africa exports. And I can attest that I think mainly that attributed to the Africa Free Trade that you just mentioned. And another positive thing is that there is quite a significant demand of South Africa's agricultural products to Asia and Middle East. And this includes the likes of the beef, which we have seen, even Martin, we've seen some 70% increases in its exports to the region. So the issue is that we would like to maintain that. But for South Africa as perspective in terms of trade, we cannot overlook any market at this stage, because the way our production is increasing, it is quite rapidly, and with that, we require more markets for that. And remember, we have the IMP, which also advocates for more production, and with that production, those products, they're going to have to go to some certain markets. And it's positive things, at least news, to see that some of the key markets, or a huge market globally, are opening up for South Africa. And not only that, it is going to be important that we continue to maintain this, even including the United States. Should we not lose it? It is benefiting South Africa. For instance, you can look in terms of what has been happening in terms of its value exports from South Africa. From around 2019, we exported around 5 billion. As of last year, it was around close to 10 billion. So even US is increasing, because it's a huge market that we cannot afford to overlook. But the reality is that we also need to make sure that we do expand our markets as much as possible. And of course, with doing that, we really need to, watch our footing in the global space, because it remains quite a delicate one. Be it we are operating within the BRICS, be it it's within Asia or any country, particularly given that, as I said earlier on, that we are seeing quite a rapid rise in our production at the hands of the farmers.
Thabile, I have to end this interview, but it's very hard not to bring up the whole issue around the expropriation bill and the threat that this may have as well to the agricultural sector. And I'm not necessarily pertaining to the contents of the bill, but I'm talking about the rhetoric that's coming out, particularly of America and from President Trump about it, and the bad publicity, and perhaps the investment that we may lose towards that. I'm not sure if you've got views on this as well, if you can very quickly add to that.
The bill, Leon, is something that, it created quite a storm in South Africa only, and of course also if you had to move abroad. But there's also some positive developments. I was also listening from the EU, guys, commenting around it. As much as a lot of it has been around the sort of miscommunication of it, particularly in relation to the US, because I think we have seen across how people have managed to sort of, including across races in South Africa, tried to sort of come to the aid of how this was misrepresented. But the reality is that it has went out, and a lot of people have made, some judgments based on it, and that includes President Trump based on what he has said. So the reality is that for now, we would like to, communicate and all the developing policy as clear as possible and sort of cut any ambiguity that might appear because of misinformation. And particularly, this is a role that our international relations needs to do now, and actually it's clear. And of course, commentators, they need to make sure that they communicate it properly so that any misunderstandings can be addressed as clear as possible.
Thabile, we leave it there. Thank you. Thanks for weighing in on it. And that seems to be the sentiment from everybody. South Africa's communication strategy needs to be of a platinum standard at the moment to try and alleviate any misconceptions. Thabile Nkunjana is a senior agricultural economist for trade research at the National Agricultural Marketing Council.